Welcome to a presentation around school exclusions from the Somerset SENDIAS team, from myself, Helen Leach, Manager of the SENDIAS service, and Emily Spraggett, who is our Development Officer. So today's talk is about school exclusions, which is a very comprehensive process and complicated process as well. And we've done our best to include the main key points within this presentation. But obviously, if you can bear in mind that it is a very complex process, and we've done our best to pick out the key points for you today. So with regards to school exclusions and suspensions, there is statutory guidance that schools and academies must follow, and I've got the links here for them. There's a suspension and permanent exclusion for maintained schools, academies and pupil referral units in England, and that is including pupils moving around. There's also the uploads for alternative provisions and requirements that schools must take into account. For our link on that. There's also some guidance here around additional health needs for those children who've got additional health needs that need support in attending school, and is helpful when it comes to school exclusions and suspensions. And also new guidance around mental health and responsibilities for schools in supporting those children with mental health issues back into school. So, but starting off with the law, so the law, there's a section under Section 19 of the Education Act around exclusions. And the first point of that is that each local authority shall make arrangements for the provision of suitable education. And that's key word there is suitable education at school or otherwise than at school for those children of compulsory school age who, by reason of illness, exclusion from school or otherwise, may not be for any period receive suitable education unless arrangements are made for them. The second point is that in relation to England, because laws are different in Scotland and Wales, the education to be provided for a child shall be full-time, or in the case of a child with under the section below, education on such a part-time basis as an authority considers to be in the child's best interest. It's interesting to note that there is no statutory guidance on how many hours mean full-time, so it's quite a grey area, but full-time generally means the same amount of education that a child would get in a mainstream school. The subsection there is where children within Section 3A, if the local authorities considers that for reasons which relate to the physical or mental health of the child, it would not be in the child's best interest for a full-time education to be provided for the child. So there are some children where a full-time education would not be suitable to meet their needs, and therefore the other alternative arrangements can be made for those children. So the key points around suspension and exclusions are three main points: that if a child is excluded or suspended, the decision must be lawful, it's got to be reasonable, and it must be proportionate to the issue in which the school have decided to suspend or exclude, and it's got to be fair. The decision the school makes to then exclude or suspend a pupil, it must be based on disciplinary reasons, and they must notify the parents, and it must be in writing. Regardless of the length of the exclusion or suspension, the school must also, or an academy must also notify the local authority, so they should be aware that that's happening to those children. So the procedure around when a child is excluded, it's got a definite set out procedure. And that is, they must write to the parent and they must include information about the reason for why the child has been excluded, the length of the exclusion, whether it's a number of days, meaning a fixed term exclusion, or that it's permanent, or that it's a matter of hours. The length of the exclusion must be included in that written information for parents. It also should include information about how a parent can challenge the decision around the exclusion. It also has to point out that the responsibility to make sure your child, if they're of compulsory school age, that is that they should not be in a public place during school hours for the first 5 days of the exclusion. They also must put in alternative arrangements for that child's provision, if that's relevant for that child. The school must always provide this information in writing. It's really important if they are going to send your child home for disciplinary reasons. Even if that exclusion is very short, say for a lunchtime period, for example, they still must let you know in writing. It's not lawful for the school to tell you just to take your child home without letting you know that it's a formal exclusion. Emily.
So fixed terms exclusions, also known as suspension, school can exclude for a set number of days, up to a maximum of 45 days in a school year. And a lunchtime exclusion still counts as half a day, even if it's just for that lunchtime period they've been excluded. It does need to be recorded as half a day exclusion. When the exclusion is ended, your child must be allowed back to school. They cannot extend an exclusion. They have to issue a new fixed term or permanent exclusion when they go back to school. So you can't just say they're not going to come back to school, we're going to extend it. They do have to come back first, and then if needed, they can issue a new one. And that's only in exceptional circumstances if new information perhaps has come to light on the incident. The school should invite you and your child to a reintegration meeting on the day that your child returns to school. But your child must still be allowed in school even if they cannot attend the reintegration meeting. And during the first 5 days of exclusion, the school should take reasonable steps to set out and mark work for your child. For longer exclusions, the school must arrange suitable full-time alternative education to begin with from the 6th day of exclusion. So this could be a pupil referral unit or other alternative provision, but they must give you work for the child to do. So you can challenge a fixed term exclusion. So for all exclusions, you can put your views in writing to the school governors. This is called making representations. The governors have the power to decide whether the head teachers made the right decision, and in some cases they can overturn this and reinstate your child if they've made the mistake. It's always worth checking out legal aid via the government website .gov.uk and see if you're entitled to that, because they can represent you, give you that advice and support. Can ask the head teacher to reconsider. Obviously, it is a short window in which you can do this, but it's worth asking. Make representations to the governing body about the suspension exclusion using the model letters that are online. And there's some on IPSI as well. And it's a managed move a realistic option. This should be a last option, but it could be an option for them.
Thank you, Emily. Permanent exclusions. So permanent exclusion should only be issued if it's a really serious breach or persistent breaches of the school behaviour policy, and it's always worth checking out the school's behaviour policy to find out if it's up to date for one thing, and what it actually states the process for that school are going to use for their behaviours and when they look to a permanent exclusion. And also where allowing the pupil to remain at school would be a serious harm to the education or the welfare of another child or pupils in the school or adults in the school. So those are the two really key points around permanent exclusions. There is a statutory duty as well on governing bodies or local authorities to arrange a full-time education from the 6th day of the suspension or permanent exclusion. So it's really helpful to remember that if you are in the position where your child may be at risk of a permanent exclusion. Parents can challenge a permanent exclusion. The governors must meet, and that's a must, so they must do this. They must meet within 15 school days to review the exclusion. So as a parent, you have the right to attend this meeting and put your views to the governors. The governors must consider whether the head teacher's decision was lawful, reasonable, and fair. You have a right to attend that meeting, so it's really important that you get invited to that meeting and are able to attend. They also have the power to, the governing body that is, have the power to overturn the exclusion and allow your child back into school and remove that exclusion from your child's records. They can overturn that exclusion, as I just said, and they can reinstate your child, even if you don't want that child to return to the school. And sometimes that might happen. Sometimes a parent may have moved that child out of school if they have been permanently excluded, but the governors can still overturn that decision, so it's not on your child's record, even though you may not want that child to return to the school. If the governors agree with the head teacher and uphold the decision, they must write and let you know. And then you have 15 days from the date of that letter to ask for an independent review panel to look at the case and consider the exclusion. And that independent review panel hearing must take place within 15 days of your request as well. So there's quite strict timelines to those processes, because obviously permanent exclusion needs to have those a quick resolution fairly promptly. You can ask for a SEN expert to attend the hearing with you, and the SEN expert's role is to inform the panel of how the SEN may be relevant to the exclusion, about your child's SEN needs might have affected the behaviour that might have triggered the exclusion from the head teacher. The independent reviewing panel cannot overturn the decision to exclude, but they can recommend or direct the governors to reconsider the decision. So that's quite key, really, in that they can't. They can sort of recommend it and direct the governors, but they can't actually overturn the decision. If you find yourself at this point, it's certainly worth having a check on the legal aid checker to see if you're entitled to legal aid at that particular point, or if not before then, to help you. They can help and advise you with legal support. So there is a law and a duty to arrange alternative education for suspended and excluded children. So for a suspension, which is sometimes known as a fixed period, the duty falls on the school from day 6, and they need to be taking reasonable steps to provide an education within the first 5 days, but then they have to provide alternative provision after day 6 as well. So if it's a fixed period, it's not the local authorities, it's the school's responsibility. If the permanent exclusion is permanent, that's slightly different, then the duty falls on the local authority to arrange alternative provision from day 6. So slight difference there. So whichever duty applies the education to be provided, it must be full-time education, and it must be suitable for your child's need. And that must take into account your child's needs and the SEND element of that, and it must be full-time. And as I said earlier, there is no statutory guidance as to how many hours that means, but it does mean the expectation is that that child will attend a suitable education that would be aligned to the same amount of hours a child will have in a mainstream setting. The alternative provision details must be provided without delay, no later than 48 hours before the provision is due to start. For suspensions, that's beyond the 5 days, and for those under, it could be for less than 48 hours notice. So there are, again, strict timelines around when the alternative provision should be arranged and what it looks like, and you should be notified as well. If a child has an education health and care plan, the local authority continues to be responsible for the education provision of Section F. So if a child has an education health and care plan, it's slightly different in that the local authority has a duty because they are responsible for making sure that Section F is the provision is continued. So it's slightly different if you have an education health and care plan. Normally you would expect an emergency annual review to take place as well, to make sure that the right provision is going to be put in place. So informal in suspension and exclusions, well, that kind of equals unlawful exclusions and suspensions. And we've put some examples here to show you what would mean. And so for that, it could be a part-time for children where school can't meet needs. So that might be where you might find yourself in a situation where there's an informal suspension around part-time timetables. Part-time timetables again for under 5s if the school takes other children of the same age full-time and the parents want it. Encouraging parents to home educate is not lawful. It's also not lawful to encourage parents to think about off-rolling, in other words, considering another school and suggesting that another school might be able to meet their needs, whereas the current school can't. And that's called off-rolling, and that's, again, illegal, and they shouldn't be doing that. They should be doing what they can to support your child's need and not encouraging you to look at another school and take them out of the current school. So these sort of examples of where you might find this happening, informal suspensions and exclusions, they are unlawful regardless of the intention of the school, and that means that if it's informal or unlawful. It means that as a parent, you lose the loss of exclusion entitlements to all those timelines we talked about just earlier, and that's detailed out in the statutory guidance. So that leaves a parent without the strength, if you like, of the statutory guidance to support them through those processes. So, that's just something to bear in mind. Emily.
So part-time timetable is an unlawful exclusion. So there's some updated guidance. A part-time timetable should not be used to manage a pupil's behaviour, must only be put in place for the shortest time necessary, normally around 6 weeks, but it needs to be reviewed regularly to make sure it is still meeting the child's needs. It can't be an ongoing thing. Maybe a need for a temporary part-time timetable to meet the individual pupil's needs. Again, they can consider a reasonable adjustment, um, however that may look like, and particularly if they've got an illness or mental health issue. A part-time timetable must not be treated as a long-term solution, must have a time limit by which the point that the pupil is expected to attend full-time, or to be provided with an alternative provision if the current one isn't working for them. And a school agreeing to a part-time timetable for part of the week or day must be recorded as an authorised absence. So if the school have insisted that the child needs a part-time timetable, then this has to be recorded as authorised, not unauthorised. So lunchtime suspensions. If a pupil's behaviour at lunchtime is disruptive, they may be suspended from school during a lunchtime period. This still counts as a half-day exclusion, even if it's just for the lunchtime period only. The legal requirements relating to the suspension, for example, the head teacher's duty to notify the parents, apply in all cases. Just because it's a lunchtime one doesn't mean that the parent should be notified. Again, lunchtime suspensions are counted as half a school day. And check the coding on your child's attendance record to ensure that the suspension has been correctly applied, to make sure they have listed it as a suspension, and it is authorised under Code E rather than just marking it as a illegal suspension.
So reasonable adjustments, what does that look like? There's a lot of different things that you can do. And we've just put a snapshot of what schools can consider as a reasonable adjustment. And schools do need to take account of the Equality Act and children with SEND and children who've got characteristics that fall in within that remit of the the Equalities Act. So some reasonable adjustments could be wearing sunglasses or headphones in school, in the classroom. It could be being able to doodle or fidget. Lots of kids find it better to concentrate if they're sort of playing with Play-Doh maybe, or not Play-Doh, blue tack, that type of thing. Or some have specific fidget toys that help them to actually concentrate. Knowing that they can go to a safe, quiet space, that they can just calm down and just have some quiet time. Wearing a hoodie and putting up the hood if they have a sensory overload. A lot of children with sensory needs find that if they just put their hoodie up, then that sort of helps them to re-regulate and to calm down and refocus on what they're doing in the class. Timeout cards. Lots of students use timeout cards to, when they get to a point where they can't continue, they can put their timeout card on the desk and then they can go out and leave the class and then come back when they're feeling more regulated. Being allowed to walk around when they need a break. That could be walking around the classroom, it could be walking up and down the corridor, just getting a movement break. That could mean anything, but sometimes children do need to get up and walk around and then come back to what they're doing. Having a choice of somewhere to eat their lunch. Many children find it really difficult to go into a dining hall with hundreds of other children and students, and finding somewhere they quiet, maybe with a friend, that they could go and eat their lunch is it would be considered as a reasonable adjustment. Using a laptop in the class. Some children with special educational needs find it difficult to concentrate or do handwriting and struggle, whereas some of them can find it a lot more useful to use a laptop in class, and they should be able to have access to that. No homework. Some children with SEND who are really struggling, homework is additional pressure, and some students find that really difficult. And there could be an agreement that for the time being, the school doesn't issue that child with any homework. Or perhaps they could arrange for homework to be done in school time, so they are at school doing homework at lunchtime or some other period of the day. Wearing a different type of shirt to the school shirt. A lot of children find it really difficult to have fabric tightly around their neck. They might not like the feel of it. It might be very irritable to them. And so a reasonable adjustment could be that instead of wearing a school shirt, for example, they could wear a round neck t-shirt or a V-neck t-shirt or a polo shirt in place of the traditional school shirt. That would be considered a reasonable adjustment. And all these reasonable adjustments actually don't cost anything for the school in terms of funding to put in place, but they might make a huge difference for the child to be able to engage with their education. Emily.
So some top tips. There's Somerset Graduated Response Toolkit that's recently come out. Are the school using this toolkit to help to see what's available to them to look at their SEN need? To check out the school's behaviour policy. Has it been updated recently? Excuse me. Apologies. Check the school's behaviour policy, see if it's been updated. Have your child's views been taken into account and listened to? 'Cause that's really important. What do they feel about it? You know, have they been included in the decisions? Ask for the behaviour logs and records and the attendance records to make sure things are being logged as they should be and that they're legal. Any exclusion, even for a short period, must be formally recorded. Reasonable adjustments, if they've not been made for the pupil with a disability, then this can manifest itself in breaches of school rules. So again, looking at those reasonable adjustments that have just been spoken about to see if there's anything that can meet their needs. And a decision to exclude may be discriminatory if it's against the child's I can't think of the word I was going to say then. Is your child on the SEN register? Again, just check to see if they are or not. If they're not, then that could be a discussion you have with the school. Request a meeting to discuss the options with the school to see what the way forward are, see if they can meet the needs and what the way forward is. Request an EHC needs assessment, so request for an education, health and care plan if they haven't got one, because that could be the way forward in what support they need. And an EHC plan and extra support needed, request an urgent review or reassessment. So if they've got an EHC plan and things aren't going to plan, even with that in place, then obviously you can request an urgent review to get those needs looked at and get the plan updated. And it could mean possibly a change of placement if needed.
So there's lots of information online, and we've put some links on the slides for you. IPSI have recently published a helpful guide for parents around exclusions and illegal exclusions. It's very simply written, so it's really easy to read, and it's very new, and it's a really helpful guide for parents. There's information through Contact, where they've got a really good page around exclusions as well. There's also a site for those children who've been permanently excluded, that you may be able to get some more help and information from. Information on the local offer, and obviously SENDIAS can help support parents through these processes, through exclusions and suspensions. We have put a snapshot on here. It is a very complicated process sometimes, and so we haven't included every single element of it, but we've hoped to give you a sort of oversight of the sorts of things that can happen with exclusions and illegal exclusions. So you can contact us by email, and on our website we've got a lot of information on there around school exclusions and attendance, and you know, do fill in the referral form if you feel that you would like some additional support from our service. Your child is at risk of exclusion or has been having quite a few unofficial exclusions as well. So thank you very much for coming and listening to our presentation this morning, and thank you again.